Now that's up. Let's share the text. But I want to share the correct bit of text. Make sure that that's all working. Already selected the right translation, but you resized it on me. Don't know why you did that. Let's try there. Okay. Now everything is in place. At least that's what it looks like to me from my side. If it doesn't, then let me know in chat, and I'll do what I can to fix it. And let me just do one more thing. All right, there. With a minimum of fuss, we are up and running so that we can begin our discussion of Parashat Pinchas. So Parashat Pinchas is picking up immediately following the end of Parashat Balak from last week, where after failing to curse us, Balak and the people of Moab in particular, under Bilam's instruction, according to Midrash, figured out they could seduce us. To which Pinchas, the grandson of Aaron, took matters into his own hands and was instrumental in putting a pin in it, stopping it, and that's what we're going to talk about. That I mean, we're not going to talk about that today, but that's as far as we'll go in that discussion. But today we're going to deal with the other most famous part of Parashat Pinchas, which are the sacrifices. Now, we've talked before about sacrifices in general, why we have sacrifices, why they were commanded, why we don't have sacrifices these days. But for today, I wanted to focus on a lesser known aspect of the sacrificial service as understood by the Chachamim, by the sages. And so we're going to look at the sacrifices in general, and then we are going to, well, as we always do, examine one element more in depth. So let's go ahead and pick up here on chapter 28, verse number 1. If you are a regular shul goer, these words will be very, very familiar. If not, well, good. Time for you to learn them. And a reminder, come and hear them when we're doing them in the sanctuary. Verse 1. Adonai spoke to Moshe, saying, command the children of Israel and say to them, concerning my near offering, that's Fox's translation for korban, the word that's usually translated in English as sacrifice. He is trying to play on the fact that korban has the same root as karov, to be near to something. And so near offering is his attempt in English to capture that double flavor. So anytime you see near offering, understand that in English, in a sort of more mundane translation, would be sacrifice. Concerning my near offering, my food, as my fire offerings, my soothing savor, you are to take care. Bring them near to me at their appointed time. So to bring near to me or to sacrifice, that's what's going on here. Now, so clearly what we're getting here is another telling of the sacrificial service. We've talked about this in the book of Vayikra, Leviticus, but Pinchas gives a different emphasis, and that emphasis is something we'll discover as we go on. But right now we've got sort of the preamble here, that the children of Israel, Bnei Israel, are being commanded regarding sacrifices. And we are going to go in a fairly straightforward way. And you are to say to them, this is the fire offering that you are to bring near to Adonai. Lambs a year in age, wholly sound, 2 per day as a regular offering up. So this is what's called the tamid. This is the daily offering that happens every single day at the altar when it's here in the wilderness during the time of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and then later, of course, in Jerusalem. Verse 4, the one lamb you are to make as a sacrifice at daybreak, and the second lamb you are to make as a sacrifice between the setting times. And a tenth of an ephah of flour as a grain gift mixed with oil, crushed, a fourth of a hin, the regular offering up made at Mount Sinai as a soothing savor, a fire offering to Adonai. And it is and its poured offering, meaning the fancy word libation that goes along with it. A fourth of a hin for the first lamb. In the holy shrine, you are to pour it out as a poured offering of beer, of alcohol for Adonai. And the second lamb you are to make as a sacrifice between the setting times. Like the grain gift of daybreak and like its poured offering, you are to make it a fire offering of soothing savor for Adonai. So all the way up to here, we're just detailing how exactly we do the offerings, or what is involved, the precise contents of the offerings, a bit of their timing as well. So these are the two daily offerings, and the libation, the liquid offerings that go along with them. Good. Let's take a look at a few more of these. We're not going to go through the entire calendar, but I just want you to get a feel for it. And on the day of Shabbat, 2 lambs, a year in age, wholly sound, meaning without blemish, and 2/10 measures of flour for a grain gift, mixed with oil and its poured offering. The Shabbat offering up on its Shabbat, as well as the regular offering up and its poured offering. So that's what we give on Shabbat. Now, you might be confused and think this is all we do on Shabbat, but that would be a mistake. This is, in fact, the Musaf offering. This is the additional offering. We do the regular offering for every day that we talked about a second ago, the Tamid, and then on Shabbat we give an additional offering, and this is its content. One more set of offerings to make the point clear. We come to verse 11. And on the heads of your month, also known as Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of each month, you are to bring near an offering up to Adonai. 2 bulls, young of the herd, 1 ram, lambs a year in age, 7, wholly sound. So again, Fox is always trying to capture the Hebrew as best as possible. That's why it sounds a little weird. So we're talking about 2 bulls, 1 ram, and 7 lambs. And this is what is offered up on the beginning of each month. Verse 12 continues what goes with this sacrifice, and 3/10 measures of flour as a grain gift mixed with oil for each 1 bull, and 2/10 measure of flour as a grain gift mixed with the oil for each 1 ram, and a tenth a piece of flour as a grain gift mixed with oil for each 1 lamb, as an offering up of soothing savor, fire offering for Adonai, with their poured offerings, trying to get the whole thing, with their poured offerings, half a hin, so measurement, shall be for the bull, and 1/3 of a hin for the ram, and 1/4 of a hin for the lamb of wine. That is the monthly offering. This is a Rosh Chodesh offering up at its new moon, for the new moons of the year. This, like the Shabbat offering, is an additional offering. This is the Musaf offering for Rosh Chodesh. So, as an aside, you'll notice that we have 2 basic offerings each day, and then we get a 3rd offering on Shabbat or on Rosh Chodesh, and of course we do as well for other types of holidays. Now, this whole concept here is where we get our framework for our services. Why we have a Shacharit service, the morning service, corresponding to the first daily offering. Why we have a Mincha service corresponding to the second daily offering, and why we have a Musaf offering, a bonus offering that is done for Shabbat, Rosh Chodesh, and other holidays. So that is why we end up with our service alignment the way they are. The Erev service, the evening service, known as Arvit or known as Mariv, that has a different understanding as being the cleanup time for the altar sacrifices. But that is a whole additional conversation. Now, we're going to go ahead and leave it there because I want to get down to our main point, which is a very subtle reading that you might have missed when we first began and that might have escaped your notice. And that is the way of our commentary, is it doesn't need to draw our attention to the fact that we are offering sacrifices. That's very easy for even a very superficial reading to uncover. But we do need to understand some details that we might have missed on a, well, superficial reading. And when we come back here to the top, we are slightly startled, if we are reading it incredibly carefully, that this command is going out to Bnei Yisrael, to the children of Israel, because the children of Israel don't offer up the sacrifices. The Kohanim offer up the sacrifices. That is to say, the children of Aaron. And this was just re-ratified a moment ago when Pinchas was made an honorary Kohen, even though he originally had not been. Hold on, whole long story there. But the children of Israel, the rest of us, the rank and file, people like me and the other non-Kohanim of our community, we didn't offer the sacrifices. We would bring them. So, if I had a reason for rejoicing, I would bring a sacrifice. If it was a holiday, I would bring a sacrifice. If I had committed a transgression, I would bring a sacrifice. But I didn't actually do the offering up. This whole lehakriv li, to offer to me, I didn't do that. I didn't have the knife in my hand. I did not place anything on the fire of the altar. That was all done by the Kohanim. So why are these instructions being given to all of us? Why is this being stated as a communal commandment when it should be a commandment to Aharon uvanav, to Aaron and his sons, which we do see in other places, that the Torah specifies command Aaron and his children, or and his family, or and the Kohanim. We see that phrasing in other parts of the Torah. So why is that not mentioned here? So that is going to be our underlying question that we need to wrestle with, of why these commands are being directed to all of us rather than just to the priestly class. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and jump into our commentary. And our commentary today is going to be a little Talmudic excursion. Now we're going to start off with Mishnah, because after all, the Talmud usually begins with Mishnah, but sometimes it only begins with tiny little quotes, and I wanted to give you the full Mishnah that it's going to be considering as one block. For those of you who haven't studied Talmud with me, we use the Davidson's translation available on Sefaria, and one of the things this translation does is it tries to preserve the actual words of the Talmud on the page in bold, and it tries to add in additional commentary, usually almost directly taken from Rashi, to bring those pieces together into a more natural and understandable phrasing. The Talmud was not written to be read just like you would read a normal book. It was written almost like lecturer's notes. It was written like the bullet points on a PowerPoint slide. It was not something that was easy to understand without the additional explanation of here's what that means, here's what this means. And I know it's only one word, but it's standing in for five. The Davidson's translation and many other modern translations of the Talmud try to help us bridge that gap to make the Talmud more accessible to all of us. But please remember that where it is bold, that is a translation of the Talmud, or in this case, the top paragraph, Mishnah's words. Where it is not bold, that is the commentary trying to make it more readable as a single line or a single block of text. Okay, with that explanation in place, let's go ahead and see what the Mishnah has to say about our verse that we just were discussing. These are the non-priestly watches. What? What do you mean non-priestly watches? Well, first of all, make sure that you understand that a watch doesn't mean the thing on your wrist, right? A watch means the people that are appointed to cover a certain time of duty. So you can have a watch in the military for being on duty from midnight till sunrise. You can have a watch if you are a policeman guarding the city during the night. And these are watches that would happen annually for different groups. But here, we are focusing on the non-priestly watches. As we'll see, there are also priestly watches, but non-priestly, that means lay people like me and most of the other Jewish people. That apparently there were special watches for us that involve the sacrifices. Let's see what they mean. Since it is stated, our verse, command the children of Israel and say to them, my offerings of food, which is presented to me by a fire, of a sweet savor to me, you shall guard the sacrifice to me in its due season. Okay, so that's another translation of our verse in Numbers 28:2. But what does it mean? This verse teaches, says the commentary, that the daily offering was a communal obligation that applied to every member of the Jewish people. All right, so the fact that it says the children of Israel, is there to instruct all of us that although it will be the Kohanim who are actually holding the knives and lighting the fire and doing the ins and outs of the sacrifices, that the obligation is actually a communally shared obligation that is on all of our shoulders, not just the Kohanim. It is not only their responsibility, it is our responsibility. But that does raise a problem. The Mishnah asks, but how can a person's offering be sacrificed when he is not standing next to it? The Mishnah explains, since it is impossible for the entire nation to be present in Jerusalem when the daily offering is brought, the early prophets, meaning Samuel and David, instituted the division of the priests into 24 priestly watch, each of which served for approximately 1 week, twice per year. All right, so let's make sure we understand this. That the basic problem is if we are all obligated and all responsible for the sacrifices that take place every single day, then under normal circumstances, if I'm obligated to a sacrifice, I need to be there. If I commit a sin, I have to bring the sacrifice to the temple. And then I stand nearby, just outside the threshold of the sacrificial area, and I am there during the sacrifice taking place. But if it's the daily offering, well, we can't have everybody in the entire nation, even when we were a small nation, showing up twice a day to the altar. You wouldn't. When would you ever be planting your crops? When would you be harvesting your crops? When would you be shoeing your horse? It's not physically possible to have everybody there. But if it is everybody's responsibility, then how can we not be there? Okay, so the solution is to say that the early prophets, Samuel and David, divided up the Kohanim into 24 priestly watches, because it ended up that we had too many priests as well. That if you were to have every Kohen in the country always in Jerusalem, one, they would be neglecting their duties in all of the other towns and villages to be teachers and guides. But two, there still wouldn't be enough work for them to actually do the sacrifices, each of them each day. You don't need thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of them when you're sacrificing only twice, a few more times on holidays and such. You don't need that many. But you don't want to tell some of the Kohanim, oh, we don't need you anymore. So what do? We put together a rota. We divide up the entire year into 24 slots, each one which is about a week long. And then each slot will see a particular group of Kohanim come up to Jerusalem or the Mishkan to be in charge of the sacrifices during that week. And that means they would have 2 weeks of duty throughout the year. Think of it kind of like doing reserve duty if you were in the military. So these are their 2 weeks out of the year that they have to be in Jerusalem. The rest of the time they are in their local communities doing what's necessary for them there. All right, now that part is fairly uncontroversial and is well attested to in other parts of rabbinic literature. Continue listening though. For each and every priestly watch, there was a corresponding non-priestly watch in Jerusalem of priests, Levites, and Israelites, meaning that there would be regular folks who would stand by the communal offerings for that day to represent the community. So the rest of the nation was also divided up into these watches, and that meant that there would be representatives from each watch that would have the honor and responsibility of being at the altar so that they would be symbolically representing the entire nation, just as the Kohanim are representing all of the Kohanim during any particular week when those sacrifices are being made. So, when the time arrived for the priestly watch to ascend, the priests and Levites of that watch would ascend to Jerusalem to perform the temple service. Pretty straightforward. And as for the Israelites, the rest of us, assigned to that priestly watch, some of them went to Jerusalem, like we just talked about, while the rest of them assembled in their towns and read the act of creation, meaning the story of Bereshit, the first section of Genesis. Okay, so let's make sure we got both of those elements in the Mishnah clear, that the rest of the nation, when it was my watch's turn, my slice of the nation's turn, we would send off some of our folks to Jerusalem, and they would be there at the time the sacrifices were being made. But we couldn't empty all of our community to go to Jerusalem. So some of us stayed home, but we still had an obligation at home to connect ourselves to what was going on to Jerusalem during our week's term. And what was that obligation? To read, especially from the book of Genesis, from the description of creation, what we call Maaseh Bereshit. All right, now we're going to take apart why we're reading Bereshit in just a second. But that is the basic idea here, is that far from being only a Kohen's responsibility to be offering up these daily sacrifices, as a matter of fact, it was considered to be all of our obligation, and that all of us had a part to play, whether it be actually going to Jerusalem and being there as the representative of the laity, or whether it was staying home and engaging in study and additional prayer, as we'll see, centered around the story of creation. That the rest of us still had a role to play. As much as it was reserved for the Kohanim to actually use the implements of sacrifice and to be attendant to the fire, and as much as the Levites had special duties as well, the rest of us too, the vast majority of the Jewish people, we were still intimately involved, almost as much as what the Kohanim and Levites were doing. All right, so that's a very important psychological shift, something that many people miss, where they think that the sacrifices were only focused on the Kohanim and that the rest of us had nothing to do with it unless it was a personal event. No, we all are connected to the communal activity of the sacrifices. Okay, with that in mind, the Gemara. For those of you who don't know, the Gemara is the rabbinic discussion of what the Mishnah had said, trying to expand, untangle, clarify any of the different points the Mishnah was making, or bring in additional information that perhaps wasn't obvious from what the Mishnah had said. And together, the Mishnah and the Gemara are usually printed in what we call the Talmud. So when we say Gemara or we say Talmud, although there are technical differences between those two terms, it's okay to use them interchangeably in most situations. So if you hear me going back and forth, Gemara equals Talmud, Talmud equals Gemara, as far as what we're studying today. Okay, so in the section of the Talmud that is dealing with this passage from the Mishnah, when they are analyzing this point, they are saying there were 24 priestly watches in Eretz Israel and 12 in Jericho. All right, wait, 12 in Jericho? The Talmud is surprised by that idea, that the sages taught that there were 24 plus 12 in Jericho. That, in that case, there are too many of them, as this makes a total of 36 watches, which means our whole year division doesn't work. Rather, the Breita should read as follows. There were 24 in total, 12 of which were in Jericho. How so? When the time arrived for members of a certain priestly watch to ascend, half the priestly watch would ascend from all over Eretz Israel to Jerusalem, and half the priestly watch would ascend from Jericho, in order to provide water and food to their brothers in Jerusalem from Jericho. All right, so this is a little bit of an aside. The Talmud does that a lot. It's not always a straight path, linear type of book. But this is trying to say that, yes, there are 24 watches. And when they said 24 and 12 from Jericho, they didn't mean 36. As you might have mistakenly thought from this additional text. That's what a Breita is. It's another version of the Mishnah that helps us understand the Mishnah, but we have to reconcile them. And we've reconciled it fine, which is to say that members from each watch would come from all over the country, and the members of that same watch that lived in Jericho would come, and especially those who lived in Jericho, because of its great prosperity, they would have an extra responsibility to provide for the others that were coming from the rest of the country. So Jericho is spelled out here because it had that special status, but the actual amount of people would come from all over the country. All right, the Talmud continues. Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said, always the Talmud likes to give the chain of tradition where possible. Priests, Levites, and Israelites are all indispensable for the offering, and consequently, they all must be present when the daily offering is sacrificed. So Rav Yehuda is saying that Shmuel wanted to make sure we understood that from our Mishnah, the first paragraph we read, that we understood that Kohanim, the Leviim, and the rest of us are all matter. We all have to be there. You can't do these sacrifices without us, the regular Israelites. Now, he has some proof around this with a different idea, or rather, there's a comparison, a contrast around a different idea. It is taught in a Braita, again, another piece of text, that Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, priests, Levites, and musical instruments are indispensable for the offering. Okay, that seems like a contradiction. We just said priests, Levites, Israelites. He just said priests, Levites, and instruments. The Gemara asks, with regard to what principle do they disagree? Like, what is the argument about? One sage, Shmuel, our first text, holds that the main aspect of the Levite song that accompanied the offering is vocal. And one sage, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, holds that the main aspect of their song is instrumental, performed with a vessel. Therefore, both the Levites and their instruments must be present for the daily offering. So they are actually saying the same thing. It wasn't that Rabbi Elazar meant to deny the importance of the Israelites. He was simply trying to reinforce that it isn't just the Levites themselves, but it's Levites plus their instruments, because the instrumental accompaniment was an essential element to their service. So therefore, he added the extra word instruments, not as a replacement to the Israelites, but as a clarification for the word Levites. And if you're a little confused, that's okay. This is how Talmud works, and even with the additional commentary and translation, it is still a challenge to read until you get into the sort of rhythm of how the Talmud discusses different issues. But of course, getting the rhythm is the whole point, and that is where the great endeavor lies, and it's also where the great benefit comes. We can talk about that another time. Anyone who wants to know more about Talmud study, get in touch with me. The Mishnah taught. Going back to our Mishnah line, back from our first paragraph, we're now going on to the end of that paragraph. And the Israelites of that priestly watch assembled in their towns and read the act of creation. All right, we already know that. The Gemara is now going to give commentary. From where is this matter? Meaning, where did you learn that this is what they're supposed to do? The Gemara is always keenly interested in sourcing why the Mishnah has made some claim. The Mishnah often will tell you why it's there, or it'll be self-evident. But when it's not self-evident, the Gemara will want to find out, where did our previous generations of rabbis learn this? Well, where did they learn that this must read this specific portion? Rabbi Yaakov Bar Acha said that Rav Asi said, were it not for the non-priestly watches, the rest of us, and the temple service, heaven and earth would not continue to exist. As it is stated in Genesis 15, and he said, Lord God, by what shall I know that I shall inherit it? All right, now this is not self-explanatory. Don't worry, the next paragraph is going to unpack this. But the short explanation that we need up to this point is that Rabbi Yaakov is saying, that Rav Asi said, that this verse from Genesis 15, which is Abraham talking with God, is the beginning of the section of the Torah that will help us understand why we read about creation while everyone else in Jerusalem is doing the actual physical sacrifices. Now, why is this particular line so important? Well, the Gemara explains. Abraham said, Master of the universe, perhaps the Jews will sin before you. Will you treat them as you did the generation of the flood and the generation of the dispersion? That means, and destroy them. Dispersion is talking about the story of the Tower of Babel. So essentially, the Midrash here is trying to say, Abraham was concerned, because how will I know that I will inherit the blessings that you are talking about for all generations, for all time? Because, as much as I will enjoy your blessings, what I, as Abraham, really want is for everybody all the way down the line to be able to enjoy this as well. And, the flood, the Tower of Babel, sometimes God, you get mad, and when you get mad, the bad things happen. So how do I know that things are going to be okay when my descendants, the Jewish people, mess up when they sin? God said to him, "No," meaning I will not destroy them. Abraham said before God, "Master of the universe, tell me with what shall I inherit it?" Meaning, how can I make my descendants ensure that you will maintain the world? What do they need to do in order to make sure that you don't destroy the world, that you actually forgive them and that the world can keep going on? God said to Abraham, "Take for me a 3-year-old heifer and a 3-year-old goat and a 3-year-old ram and a turtle dove and young pigeon." And this is all from chapter 15, verse 9, immediately after, "By what shall I know that I shall inherit it?" Now, in context, verse 9, this whole sacrificial layup, seems to be talking about what Abraham needs to do in order for God to reveal to him what's coming in the future. But the Midrash is reading it as there was a specific explanation about sacrifices, and that is a hint, that is an allusion towards the importance of the sacrifices in the system of maintaining the world, of literally keeping the world worthy of going on. God was alluding to the offerings, in whose merit the Jewish people, and through them the entire world, would be spared divine punishment, meaning spared from having the entire world destroyed. However, Abraham has a follow-up question, and remember, asking follow-up questions is a time-honored Jewish tradition. Abraham said before God, "Master of the universe, this works out well when the temple is standing," meaning when we can do offerings, "but when the temple is not standing, what will become of them?" Right? If you're telling me that the offerings are so important because not only do they allow us to have a pathway towards forgiveness, but that they are also the underlying reason of why the world isn't destroyed, well, what's going to happen when the temple gets wiped out? And the Midrash, of course, understands that Abraham, having his relationship with God being so powerful and full of prophecy, would have known that at some point the temple would be wiped out. God responds in the Gemara. God said to him, "I have already enacted for them the order of offerings," meaning I will teach them the order of offerings. "When they read them before me, I will ascribe them credit, as though they had sacrificed them before me, and I will pardon them for all their transgressions." Meaning, says the commentary, since the offerings ensure the continued existence of the Jewish people and the rest of the world, the act of creation is read in their honor. So what we end up having here are two different things that were being read during this time. Well, actually, let me untangle that time-wise, because we have two different time periods. During the time of the temple still standing, when we had the altar and sacrifices were taking place, the people would be at the temple to make those offerings because God had ordained them. And as we fulfilled them, the people back home in the towns for that week's watch would read the story of creation to remind themselves that what they were currently doing, being involved in the temple service, was upholding the existence of the world, that this was keeping the reason for the world alive. Because as long as we were willing to admit mistakes, to fix our transgressions, and to celebrate the world as God had asked, then there was still a purpose for the world. Whereas when we decide that we are not going to do any of that, well, then why bother having a planet in the first place? So during the time of the temple, the people back home were acutely aware that this service was a service for the reason, for this support of all of creation. So reading from Bereshit was incredibly important and powerful. Now, temple is destroyed. We're into time phase number 2. Well, we're no longer doing the sacrifices in the temple, which means there's no longer the weekly watches from different groups, which means there's no longer anybody reading about creation at home while someone else is doing sacrifices. However, when we still read about the sacrifices, it counts as though we had actually done it. This is an incredibly important idea found throughout Rabbinic Judaism, that to study about something involving the sacrifices is every bit as good as actually doing it. This is reinforced through different teachings in the prophets and Psalms about the idea that it's not the mechanics of the sacrifice itself that affects anything. It is the kavanah, the intentionality and the purpose behind the sacrifices, which is why sacrifices without actual intent are not just meaningless, but are actual desecrations of God. So when we take that and clarify it, then that means even if we can't do the sacrifice, as long as we read of them with the correct intent, then we are accomplishing the same thing that we would have accomplished had we been able to do them in person with an actual altar and the proper sacrificial system. So this is one of the ways that Judaism understands that we don't actually need sacrifices day in, day out, now that the temple is destroyed, because we are still able to follow their instruction towards that connection. This is also why, if you are reading through your Siddur on any given holiday in particular, you'll notice in the Musaf service that it mentions the details of those sacrifices. Because by reading those parts of the sacrifice, you are partnering with all of our people throughout the centuries in not only fulfilling the sacrifices by their recitation, but by also celebrating the importance of the whole theme of Judaism as being essential for the continued existence of creation. And that you are saying, I believe things can be better. I believe I can be better. I believe that this world does not have to continue to degrade, but that instead the world can continue to improve. That is the underlying essence of all the sacrificial services. And that is, of course, the underlying explanation for why creation was even made in the first place. It is only because we knew of this incredible potential of humanity. And as Jews, we are especially obligated to celebrate and to remind ourselves and everyone else about that amazing potential. Okay, I could go on forever on this because it's an incredibly important topic, but there is more that I want to share from this unique section of Talmud, and we'll never get there if I just keep going off. Okay, so continuing. The sages taught the members of the priestly watch would pray for the offerings of their brothers, meaning if you were part of the priestly watch but not actually at the altar, because not everyone could be there, then you would pray on behalf of them for what they were doing at the daily offering, that it should be accepted with favor. And meanwhile, the members of the non-priestly watch remained in their towns and would assemble in the synagogue and observe 4 fasts. Remember, this is over a week period. Over 7 days, there were 4 fast days that were there. So in addition to reading about creation, they are also engaged in 4 fasts. All right, let's go through the fasts and see what they are. On Monday of that week, on Tuesday, on Wednesday, and on Thursday. So those were our 4 fast days. So yes, if you were home, you would have been going into these different fasts as part of your support of what was happening at the temple. On Monday, they would fast for seafarers, that they should be rescued from danger, as the sea was created on Monday. So appropriate theme, again, with this line of creation being our underlying point. And this would give us a chance to pray on behalf of everybody who was traveling by sea, because the sea was incredibly dangerous in the ancient world. Still dangerous, but we've got better protection now. On Tuesday, they would fast for those who walk in the desert, as the dry land was created on Tuesday. So the desert is the driest of dry land. And therefore, people who were in the wilderness, traveling between the inhabitable areas of the land, they were especially at risk. And so prayers on their behalf and a fast on their behalf was incredibly important. On Wednesday, they would fast over croup. Croup is a particular type of illness that it should not befall the children who were apparently susceptible to it. As on the 4th day, the bodies of light, me'orot, were created, which is a textual allusion to curses, me'erot. So they're doing a little bit of a play on word here, but the underlying idea is, of course, that we're now making special prayers and fasting to support those that are vulnerable as children. So vulnerable at sea, vulnerable in the desert, vulnerable as children. Maybe you're noticing a pattern here is that these additional prayers are not prayers for wealth, and they're not prayers for power and for success. These are prayers to help protect the people that are the most likely to be injured, hurt, or die from illness. And on Thursday, we're going to add the final category, which was also and still is incredibly important. On Thursday, they would fast for pregnant women and nursing women, as living beings were first created on this day. For pregnant women, they would fast that they should not miscarry, while nursing women, they should fast that they should be able to nurse their children properly. Both, of course, are incredibly important, and both are often undervalued as the blessings they are in the modern world, where we become more expectant that everything will go right and easily, when in fact pregnancy is still incredibly difficult, even with the assistance of modern medicine. And even taking a child and helping it learn how to eat is something that can still not go according to plan. This is not a slam dunk, super easy, there's no way this could ever go wrong. This is still something that needs often a lot of guidance and a lot of assistance, something which unfortunately many families find in short supply when they're often not around other members of the family who have already gone through it that could share their wisdom, because so much of the modern world is spent alone and distant from our family members or even as many friends who might have shared that experience. Again, that's a whole nother discussion, but those are our 4 different fasts. Now, on Shabbat Eve, they would not fast in deference to Shabbat, and Kal v'chomer, all the more so, a fortiori, they would not fast on Shabbat itself. So you'll notice Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we've got fasts going on here. Friday, Erev Shabbat, we're not fasting because Shabbat is just around the corner and it would be inappropriate. Shabbat, we're not going to fast either because you never fast on Shabbat. That is a hard rule. Day 7 then, well, when would what would the 7th day, not of the week, but what would the 7th day of this cycle be? Well, it would be the first day of the week, which is Sunday. So are we fasting on Sunday or not? Well, we've already listed it and Sunday wasn't listed. So the Gemara is going to ask us, why not? The Gemara asks, what is the reason that they would not fast on Sunday? Why not have another fast on Sunday about a different vulnerable group? Rabbi Yochanan said, it is due to the Christians, as Sunday is their day of rest, and they would claim that even the Jews ascribe significance to their special day. So Rabbi Yochanan understood in the early days of Christianity as it developed, and as they chose to move their Sabbath to Sunday rather than the actual Sabbath of Shabbat, that we now were in a bit of a pickle. How do we do something special on a Sunday without looking like we are giving credence to a Christian claim that Sunday has special meaning? And this is a tension that we have had not just with Christians, but also with Muslims over the last couple thousand years. That sometimes they will adopt or they will begin to behave in a certain way that we then will have to change of our own, because it now would appear that we were following them rather than they were following us. It's frustrating, but it has been important in order to not give additional ammunition. As anybody who's ever spent time listening to Christian evangelicals that wish to proselytize and try to make Jews give up our Judaism, they love to find random statements, out of context quotes, and other techniques to try and prove their point. So I think Rabbi Yochanan was spot on, that had we done anything special on Sunday, they would have said, aha, even on Sunday, you Jews recognize yada, yada, yada. So Sunday is treated as a regular day. Now, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani, as is often in these types of debates, doesn't want to give an explanation that is wholly dependent upon someone else's religion. And so instead, he has a more internal explanation. Because it is the 3rd day after creation, meaning after the creation of humanity. Adam was made on Friday. So Friday, 1st day, Saturday, 2nd day, Sunday was the 3rd day after creation, right? So on the 3rd day of recovery from a wound or sickness, in this case, one's very creation, it is considered the most painful. So Sunday is the hardest day because it is an echo of that peak pain after our creation on that Friday. So Sunday gets a special, you don't have to fast pass for that reason. All right. Now, Reish Lakish is going to offer a third explanation for why we are not fasting on Sunday when we were involved in this temple watch. They would not fast on Sunday due to the added soul. As Reish Lakish said, an added soul is given to a man on Shabbat Eve, and at the conclusion of Shabbat, it is removed from him. As it is stated, this is from Vishamru, which many of you'll know from our Friday services. He ceased from work and rested. Vayinafash. Now, Vayinafash has that root word nefesh, meaning soul, and Reish Lakish took this to mean that our soul is kind of doubled. It is expanded during Shabbat. Indeed, when we celebrate Shabbat well, we can feel that additional spiritual feeling that just isn't found during a regular weekday. But which he expounds as follows: since one has rested on Shabbat and Shabbat has then passed, woe for the soul, vai nefesh, vayinafash, vai nefesh. It's very similar sounding, meaning that the soul has been lost when we come off of Shabbat, when we hit Sunday, which really begins Saturday night, remember, with Havdalah, that we are feeling drained, we are feeling weakened because we have lost that extra soul, asking us to then fast in addition to that recovery of having lost the extra buoyancy of Shabbat. That would simply be too much. So Shabbat, Sunday, no fasting. All right, now that's the end of our text, and we're going to wrap it up here. But I just want to draw your attention one more time to the incredible power of the teaching that we often think of Judaism as being something that someone else does. The Kohanim did things at the altar in Jerusalem, but it didn't bother me. It didn't involve me. The rabbi does things at the synagogue, but that's what the rabbi does. It doesn't involve me. That is not the way our ancestors, it's not the way the Torah, it's not the way we think about Judaism. Judaism is a all hands on deck activity. Judaism is something that involves each of us and involves each of us every day. Even in this rubric of when we were doing our special fasts in the ancient world, we don't do them now, but when we did them in the ancient world, we are seeing that every day had something special. Even the days we didn't fast, there was a special reminder of why we weren't fasting that still deepened our understanding and connection to God and Judaism and the world. And that is true now, just the same way, meaning that we still have an opportunity each and every day, whether we are a professional Jew or whether we are not, whether we are a regular synagogue attendee or whether we are not, to still find a connection, whether it be just engaging in prayer in the normal way that we should, but keeping in mind this idea that what we are doing is supporting all of creation, or whether it be finding a different focus each day, as these different fasts laid out in the ancient world, that we may not need to fast, but we can still focus on different issues and people that are in need and vulnerable to so much of the hurt in the world, that extra attention that we give, again, is underlying the idea that it is for this that creation exists, that we are not like the selfish and brutal of the generation of the flood and the generation of the dispersal, that we are the children of Abraham, and we are looking for the future, and we are looking out for each other. So hopefully that will settle in your mind and in your habits of behavior so that you can take this to heart. With that, we'll finish up for today and look forward to studying something new next week too. Take care, everyone, and be well.